Hey everybody, John Malanca here with my friend and co-host Natasha Trenev, the mother of probiotics. Hi, Natasha.
Hey, good to see everyone, especially your smiling face.
Thank you very much. And I'm smiling because of the topic today, kombucha, health drink or health risk. And I used to be a regular kombucha drinker until I met you. So um, share what you share with me. And it's funny because every time that we do speak with guests or friends who have met you, I stopped drinking kombucha because of Natasha, and so I said, "Yeah, she got to you as well." So have at it, Natasha. Please share some of
Yeah.
this knowledge.
Well, first of all, I'm not against anybody having a business or sharing a cultural phenomena, which kombucha is. My problem is that Americans have a tendency to adopt things from different cultures without really understanding how it's used in the culture and why it's used in that way in the culture. So, to make it short, in the 1990s, there's what they call the tea. Kombucha tea was brought over as a medicinal food. And supposedly, families who were in the know from these Asian countries were the ones first making the first samples, which I don't have a problem with if the families really know what they're doing. But let me just put it to you this way: fermentation is rocket science. It's not that easy that people think that they understand bacteria or yeast. And so, as a consequence, a lot of the people who I know brought this drink to me, and I said, first of all, it's made by a yeast and a bacteria that produces cellulose. And I said, we have no idea about this bacteria producing cellulose. What is this bacteria doing with this yeast when normally yeast does not make alliances with bacteria? That's why it produces alcohol, which is a toxin to kill bacteria. All of a sudden, you have this bacteria that's supposedly working for this yeast to brew this tea to make it a health drink. And I said, let's look how this kombucha was used in the culture. It was used as a medicinal preparation. It was not used as a beverage that people consume every day, especially in the quantities we resume. And when it was given as a medicinal preparation, it was only given in 4 ounces and used very sparingly by the person who wanted to have a certain health effect. And then I said, how is it that our culture can adopt something and drink it every day in large quantities without ever knowing how it was used in the culture and why it was used this way? And I'll just go on a small tangent to tell you why I'm so upset, because earlier in the 1980s, I told people, why are you drinking all this soy milk? We have no idea what soy milk will do to us, because look at the Japanese. The Japanese only consume soy milk in small quantities, and that's usually on the weekend as a health elixir, because Japanese and Asian people like to drink elixirs, and it's usually 6 or 8 ounces. They're not drinking a pint of this stuff every day. So, long story short, you know that the consumption of soy milk mimics production of the estrogen hormone. I won't go into particulars. I always like to keep my topics simple because I don't know who's watching. And as a result, people started having problems with disease. And then all of a sudden, you couldn't find, any soy milk product on the shelf. And I think this is the same thing that's happening with kombucha. Now, kombucha is more dangerous because it uses a yeast. And the yeast is, could possibly be producing other compounds depending on the expertise of the person fermenting the yeast and the bacteria together to make the kombucha drink. You see, there are no federal or state standards. So you're really relying on the person, how they're brewing this tea, how much acid they're allowing to brew in the tea, and if there's some slight amount of alcohol, which shouldn't be there because it can cause serious disruption in your body's very neat balance, where your intestinal tract just needs to be slightly acidic, 5.6 pH, and your cellular structure with the cytoplasm or protoplasm, whichever you learn to call it in school, needs to be slightly alkaline. And so people don't know when they consume a drink that can cause something called acidosis, that meaning too much acid is produced and you get sick. It's a very dangerous thing. And second of all, yeast drinks is not something that should be consumed in large quantities today. Why? Because we've had a problem for the last 50 years with antibiotics in our culture. I'll just give you a couple examples. Even an old pediatric study can tell you that by the time a child is 1 year old, it's had at least 4 courses of antibiotics. And that's, normal in our culture. Antibiotics were handed out like candy by doctors to appease their patients who came in with whatever ailment, and they had to give them the antibiotic. So when that disruption happens in your GI tract, yeast, like other organisms, is very opportunistic. So if you start drinking that in large amounts in your intestine, it's going to start trying to control its territory. When it tries to control its territory, it can also stimulate the growth of harmful yeast that turns into a mold and can start really taking advantage of your body. And according to the former head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Constantini, who for years lectured that he felt that mold and fungus were the cause of cancer and every other disease in the body. Okay, I just want to give you a little bit of that background where we shouldn't be fooling around with yeast. So whether you agree with him or not, it was he and 2 other German scientists that spoke about this very often, but their voices were silenced. And that's not good for humanity and not good for any of us. So now, having said that, now you're consuming a yeast on a daily basis. So those of you who say, well, I didn't really take a lot of antibiotics during my youth. Well, most people don't know that your pesticides are potent antibiotics. And I'll give you the prime example. Now, probably most of you have heard of glyphosate, which was the active chemical ingredient of a product called Roundup, owned by Monsanto. And Monsanto was sued. Now, glyphosate was first patented as an extremely potent antibiotic. So not only are you getting secondary antibiotics in your food, you now are getting secondary antibiotics, even if you're buying organic vegetables and other food, you're getting it if you're going on a lawn. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. My friends who now live in Arizona lived in Laguna Niguel, which is a more retirement community, and it had a huge golf course. So they used to keep their windows open when this golf course was sprayed with this Roundup, and they got a good whiff of this, glyphosate, and they ended up both of them getting cancers. Luckily, they survived. So why I'm giving you this backstory, we are not a culture that can consume large amounts of anything made with yeast, especially when there's no standards. At least if you're drinking a beer that's brewed by yeast, you know that there's national standards and it's very tightly regulated. With kombucha, there's hardly any regulation as far as the contents, what it produces in the product. There are no standards that I know of any agency checking. They're just going to walk in and see what their fermentation cycle is to see if they have contaminants, but that's about it. So now you have this scenario. You have most of the people in the United States, 80% supposedly chronically ill, now consuming this beverage, which they think is helping their microbiome in large quantities without knowing what that yeast is doing in there, how it's cooperating with the other bacteria, and what it's actually doing to you internally. So what my guidance here is, do not take products in large quantities that we're not taking in large quantities from the culture they come from. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm going to repeat that. So if in the culture they're drinking this medicinal drink and it's only handled by family who have probably had decades or centuries of experience brewing this and giving it to other people, do not adopt this and say large quantities of this is going to make me even more healthy and I'm going to do it on a daily basis. I don't know if I said too much, John. You maybe act as part of the agent for the audience and tells me if I didn't explain something here.
Yeah, I look at it I see my friends with their kids in high school as well in college. My generation, everyone turned to, I'll say, Gatorade, and then the last generation turned to power energy drinks, Red Bull, Monster, etc. This generation I'm seeing is turning to the kombucha, and I'm just seeing all the college kids just drinking that, and so I cringe when I see that. And so maybe Clip Note version, bringing it down to maybe that era that's listening, or the parents that are listening. Can you share again? I know we spoke about yeast, the long-term effects. Does it also, you mentioned there is kombucha that has higher rates of alcohol content versus not.
Yeah.
I do know that it raises liver enzymes. Is that on both the regular and decaf, so to speak, type of kombucha, or is it all kombucha?
The reason it raises liver enzymes is because when the liver raises its enzymes, it's because it's dealing with toxins, too many toxins. That's what liver enzyme, heightened activity means. So anytime your organs are reacting in a negative way to something you're consuming on a daily basis, watch out.
Yeah.
Because again, in today's day and age, yeast is not something we should be consuming in large amounts. Even beer. Now, this is what other thing I don't understand. People talk about beer bellies, yet they consume the same yeast that's used to brew beer, to brew kombucha, and you have no idea whether or not there's any alcohol produced, because I'll tell you why. Accidentally, a couple of years ago, Whole Foods recalled a whole lot of one manufactured product of kombucha because they found it to contain 2% alcohol.
Yeah.
And the acidity was so low that they knew it was going to harm the body. In fact, 2 people died. So this is why I'm telling you, people, if you're compromised, you cannot be drinking something like this. You cannot. And since we have a compromised nation of chronically ill children and chronically ill people, you cannot adopt a medicinal tonic from another culture and make it into a daily preparation or a drink. It just is very foolish and, really testing the fate and hurting your body.
Besides water, what would you replace it with?
I would only say water. You can use, water, you can develop a taste. Like I know when I drink my bottled water that always comes in glass now, I've become strict since I found out about microplastics. Oh, and by the way, kombucha and plastic, oh my God, don't even go there, because if you're talking about a microplastic problem, see that, expanded exponentially when you put a bioactive product like kombucha in a plastic container. So, yeah, I would say get used to it. I tell people in many of my lectures, it took 2 weeks to change your taste. You can talk yourself into anything. Water is the best thing. I think we were taught to be addicted to sugary drinks with the advent of Coca-Cola and then other sodas. And people started substituting soda for the natural thing, which we call water. And since you're about 70% water, I would suggest you develop a taste for water and drink that. Spend the money on good water in glass bottles that you know of and invest money in that, not in something that has yeast or sugar in it. This is not a good strategy in this day and age.
Yeah. Well, I thank you, and my gut thanks you. And the yeast contact my body. So, why don't you summarize again for our listeners, the top points that you can share before they.
Okay, so kombucha is a medicinal tonic that came in from Asian countries, and it was specially prepared in small quantities, like 4 ounces, for people to consume for maybe a week or two to deal with an ailment that culture was familiar with dealing with. We adopted this drink without any national or state standards, and it historically contains a yeast organism with a bacteria that produces cellulose, which we know very little about its health implications for short-term or even long-term use. So you do not want to be consuming a drink that we have no standards for and we have no data on a daily basis. Especially I see people drinking it in pints and quarts. It is not a good idea, especially when I know 80% of the people in this country are chronically ill. And I know we have a huge yeast problem because that yeast is also connected to a gluten problem. So without getting too technical, please stop drinking stuff or eating stuff that comes from another culture that you don't know how your body would utilize it.
So let me, in closing here, I'm picturing friends and their kids going through issues with yeast issues. So adding kombucha to something that's already there is
It's like
really
throwing a lighter fluid into a fire.
Gotcha. And we do see that. So, okay, well, kombucha, health drink or health risk? I'll let you all decide. But I'm going to have my glass of water, and I toast you, Natasha, as always. Thank you for this, and we'll see you soon.